back with another HEF podcast. That is the Home Education Foundation's podcast. We do this podcast every Monday at noon. We do go live, so sometimes the podcast gets a little interesting, but you'll also find replays of it on Rumble, Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and a whole host of others. So if you check out our website, flhef.org/podcast, you can find your favorite link to listen in on. And without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. We always like to say thank you to Brenda Dickinson, our founder, one of our founders. Brenda and Craig started the Home Education Foundation in the early 1990s, just after securing a victory for home education families in the state of Florida to secure home education rights so that they could teach their children directly without having to jump through loopholes, sign into a private school, and hide their kids in the closet until the public school kids were out. We can stand freely in our front yards or go to the beach and do math, and that is just some of the really cool liberties that we have since she started working in the early 1980s, almost 40 years ago. And today, I carry that torch forward. My name is Jason Crawford. I'm the new lobbyist for the Home Education Foundation, and we move and shake in the Capitol to try to make sure that our representatives and senators hear from our parents, and they have someone representing their voice about their freedoms and rights. And so we also want to say thank you to those parents in the free state of Florida who home educate their children, who prioritize making memories and facilitating the bonds with their family, and supporting the work that we do. And we thank our top sponsors, Arete, FPEA, Fisher Precious Metals, and TVHC Group, for also coming in clutch to support the work that we do. Without you, we wouldn't be able to do nearly as much as we're able to do. And I'm sad to say that today we don't have Brenda with us. However, we do have a really interesting assortment of guests, and I'll introduce them from the left to the right on the screen. We have Representative Shane Abbott, who is with us today, as well as Jordan Stark from the FHSAA. And we're going to start kind of diving into the definitive podcast episode of everything you need to know about 538 and what it means for you. Representative Abbott, thank you for being with us today, taking time out of your busy schedule. I know that all the budget things are dropping and vetoes are happening, so I appreciate you making the time to be with us and kind of kick this off.
Well, thank you for having me.
Of course. And Jordan, if you don't know who Jordan is, she is the let me get this right, correct me if I'm wrong, the Associate Executive Director at the FHSAA, right?
Yes, sir. Associate Executive Director of Eligibility and Compliance.
Eligibility and Compliance. And so
Yeah.
you've been in that role for like 15 years. So if you think that Brenda Dickinson is really good at being able to quote things, I think Jordan Stark has the FHSAA bylaws memorized. You could probably turn to a random one and she'll know both what it says and the history behind it. So it's great to have you with us to dive into today's topic.
Thank you.
All right. Representative Abbott, I want to make good use of your time because I know it will be short. I would just have a couple of questions for you. This Senate Bill 538, you ran the House bill side of it, and together we came out with something that was really good in the end. At least I think so. I know that it went through a lot of changes, and since it's been signed, there's just been a lot of kind of controversy. What was some of the goal and intent behind these changes? What problem were you trying to solve?
Yeah, so I had a couple coaches come to me during the summer of last year before session and bring up a couple of issues that were starting to occur. A lot of them were from the school choice bill that we had passed. You know, when we passed that school choice bill, that was based on academics, and what was happening is now we had individuals abusing it for athletics. My first coach was an in-district coach who called and said, "Hey, I got a kid that played football with me, transferred to another school in the district to play basketball, and then went to a third school to go play baseball, and now he's transferring back here in the summer to play football for me again." He's like, "We can't keep doing this." And then, you know, you start digging in and you find these stories where A kid played in a playoff football game for one school, lost, transferred schools, had to sit out the next week, but because that school won the next week, they were eligible to play in the third round of the playoffs for a second team. And
Wow.
and so we just had to figure out how to get control over it.
Yeah.
And it gotten really good. You know, there's a lot of new things in sports nowadays. There's a lot of travel ball.
Yeah.
That didn't
Yeah.
exist when I was in school.
Me neither, man.
But travel ball is huge, and what happens now is they've become like a tight knit family, and so you're starting to hear some rumbles of some folks that were going to, you know, put all these, you know, some of them were going to homeschool, some of them are going to use charter schools to put their kids in, and then go take over, in essence, a baseball squad somewhere. Well, that's not what we've designed Florida high school athletics for. And that's the fastest way to stack teams to where it's not competitive for other kids at other schools. And so that's how this started. And then we started crafting, you know, there was already language where the counties could patrol this, but obviously they either didn't want to or chose not to because it had become a problem. But that also means you have 67 different potential rules on this thing. And you also, what do you do when a kid is crossing county lines, and go from one rule to another rule? And listen, we all know that if you got a star athlete, no county's saying no to a transfer. So we had to do something, and we started with something, and then we narrowed it down some more and crafted a little more. But I think where we ended up is in a really good spot. We did run into a little thing right afterwards, which was we had some kids at some charter schools that had already been enrolled, or homeschools that had been enrolled in a school in another county,
right?
And had already started athletics. So, you know, kudos to FHSAA and the commissioner of education, as they kind of found a way to let's grandfather clause some kids in, and did that. And then moving forward, you know, everybody knows the rules, and you know, can then make decisions accordingly. I want to make sure that everybody knows we didn't take decision making away from you. We just didn't say, we're now saying you don't have unlimited decisions to get to make. You still are the one who gets to make a decision where your kid's going to go and all that, but you don't get to have 2 and 3 and 5 decisions on, I want this, and I want my cake, and I want my certain icing and a certain candle, and then eat it with a certain fork also. So.
Well, I appreciate the position that you're in and the difficulty, because there is a balance. There's always a negotiation, a give and take. When you look at absolute freedom, which in essence is chaos, we all do whatever we want to do, and there are no rules. That's true freedom. And then, well, let's agree to play together, and so let's agree to abide by some rules. We can't just show up with our own baseballs and demand to play baseball, and like, well, my baseballs are this size and they're made of that. Like, there's a system of rules that when we come together we agree to play upon. So there is a bit of give and take, and I do appreciate that about what you do, and I appreciate you listening to us and the home education families as we kind of worked together to collaborate on some of the things that were very troublesome for us in the earlier versions of the bill. So I agree with you that where we've landed is very far from where we started, and it's been really good to see this kind of shift and become what it is. Are there any unintended consequences that you think still need to be tweaked and maybe the near future perhaps, or is it wait and see what people try to do?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, that's kind of how we are right now. That's why the bill came about, is it was, folks were figuring out what loophole they could expose or use. And so that's what brought this bill on. And there potentially could be, I've got some folks that are homeschooling right now that want to send their kid to an athletic program at a Christian school to play those athletics, but they don't have one in the county. I'm going to keep an eye on that. I'll be quite frank, and this may make some listeners upset, but I don't know that I'm going to have a lot of warm, fuzzy feelings on wanting to change that.
Okay.
It's one of those things where I've given you the opportunity to play that sport at any school in the county. Now you're wanting, but now you're choosing to want to limit that to a certain Christian school. But there's another option. I mean, again, it's back to you get to make decisions. If you decide that you want to homeschool, then that's great, and you can play. Your kid can play a sport. It will allow you to pick whatever school inside that county. Now, if you want them to play at that particular Christian school, then you need to probably enroll them at that Christian school.
There's an interesting kind of have your cake and eat it too. I think you said that before, where like we choose to be self-governing and utilize home education to teach our own kids, do our own thing, make our own programs, and then we have the wonderful right in the Craig Dickinson Act to go back and participate in the extracurriculars at public schools. But I think a lot of families have to realize that system it's a choice to participate in that system. It's not mandatory. And it does have certain guardrails and rules and bylaws and guidelines that we have to agree to when participating in that. So it goes back to that give and take. We try to massage the give and take so that it's not overly burdensome to parents who choose to utilize their freedoms and embrace self-governance. But it's also one of those things where when you're going to participate in a program, you kind of have to understand the rules of that system and that program when you go to participate in it. And so far, Jan, I feel like you've been a great, listener when it comes to going back and forth and having challenging conversations and sharing ideas about what we both think and where we're both coming from. And I've just got to say, I appreciate you listening. So I think it's been wonderful to be able to have that kind of repartee and go back and forth. And I think that we're right now in a good spot. I think it'll be a wait and see. I'm constantly, when I'm talking with Craig, or I haven't talked a lot with Jordan, but I'm sure she's seen it. And I sit on the Public Liaison Accountability Committee for FHSAA. So I get to see a lot of very interesting things that I am completely unaware parents are trying to do until I peek behind the curtain and I'm scratching my head going, what? So, and I know you've got plenty of those that are fueling what's going on. And I think that a lot of parents who might be in my shoes and be just as shocked by that would be just completely blindsided by some of the things that I have found out parents are trying to do. I'm not going to share any of them here on the podcast. I don't want to popularize any of them, make any of them popular. But I do understand, where you're coming from in it. And I thank you for your diligent work in putting this bill together and getting it to the finish line. So, one thing of clarity, and maybe this will just be a part of the conversation Jordan and I talk about later as we dive into it, but it was the section about the fees I found particularly interesting. And maybe I'm reading it incorrectly, but it in order for a school board to assess fees, they have to make them an action item. So they've got to make them an action item and vote on them. And then they also have to get them to their website before the start of school. Am I clear in my understanding that if they don't meet those two criteria, that their fees are not compliant with Florida law and they wouldn't be able to assess fees until they do that next year when they're compliant?
Well, and they don't. I don't think that they would have to wait an entire year. They could do it in the middle of the year if they wanted to. But it's about having that. It's going to basically make them do it in a public meeting, in a public setting, to where folks can talk about it. And there were a lot of folks that said they don't want to charge fees, and at some point, there's a cost involved in that. And to be honest with you, that was probably one of the trickiest parts of that bill, is to figure out how do we do this. And to be honest with you, I wanted to get that in there because there were schools across the state that were already implementing it, and I'm not sure that was legal at the time.
Right.
And so it was trying to get that in there. And at one point we had, I think the Senate side had a big formula type of scenario and different things like that, which is okay. But again, it comes back to, I could have 67 different fees for the same sport. And it's like, man, this is going to be a chaotic mess. Right. Now, you talked earlier, do I think I'm going to need to tweak something? absolutely, this is the piece of it that will probably have to get tweaked. But it was time to give the public schools, I don't want to say throw them a bone, but they got some skin in the game, with these athletics and sports. And so
Sure.
it was time to let them, be able to charge for those things. We pay them if a homeschool child takes a class at a public school.
Right. They can draw down funds.
We do those. They can draw down funds, and so why wouldn't we do this?
Right.
And so it came up with, it was a lot of surveying, and then just coming up with a flat dollar. Now, will that hold for a while? Maybe for a year or two, but
Right.
I understand and realize that number won't hold. But until we can find the right way to do it, and it was one of those things where let's see how this goes for a year, and then it'll expose where the problems are. And then we'll go from there. But it was one of those scenarios where I wanted to allow them to be able to do it, but I also didn't want it to be the wild, wild west. So I just said, here's the numbers.
Well, I appreciate that, and I appreciate having an entry point, and I understand what you're saying, and I agree with it. I've seen some since then who have come out with some very interesting models where they're charging for the activity, but then if all the kids are participating, they do like a family rate, and it's been interesting to see some of that evolve. I know before this happened, one county was trying to do a $2,000 extracurricular fee, and I was scratching my head going, that's a fourth of the whole scholarship. Like, what? That's a lot just to play ball. Like, that is okay. So I appreciate having some kind of guardrails. I do think that it'll probably end up getting tweaked, but it gives them an entry point, and it's interesting to see who does what with what, and I think it'll still see some movement as we move forward. But I appreciate the work that you did on it, and I think it's a great starting point. So.
Yeah, I think so too.
I want to be respectful of your time. You've given me more than you said you would give me. And if you need to go, I absolutely appreciate you being with us. Is there anything that you want to say before you bounce?
No, I'm going to probably stay around and listen to Jordan for a little bit.
Okay.
Jordan, and I'm going to be listening to Jordan a lot probably in the near future when she goes, hey, this was a mess. We got to clean this up, and I'm all ears, and I'm always, looking for, I understand there's going to be tweaks that need to be made, and we were trying to leave some flexibility for FHSAA also, so that we didn't completely strap them into a constrictive thing and allow them to come up with some, here's why you can transfers, and here's some legitimacy to what you do, and that type of thing. So I'm gonna stay around and listen for a little bit, and then I'll just jump off when I have to get.
Very good. So I think what we talked about doing was just kind of going through the initial presentation first and just kind of hitting all of the information, and then we'll dive into some of the Q&A or highlight why this is unique or what this changes moments afterwards. So Jordan, if you want to roll, I'll go ahead and pull up the presentation that you sent me.
Okay,
and
great.
I'm at the beginning, so you can roll when you're ready.
Okay, so going straight into the eligible student, the definition of an eligible student. So previously, the statute started with home education students, and as those different education models developed, we added those different types of non-traditional students. So you saw the introduction of charter and private and FLVS and the traditional public school student whose school doesn't offer the sport, and it kept growing.
Mm-hmm.
And we have the same problem in our FHSAA handbook. You have areas that change, but it touches multiple areas in the book, and you don't always catch everything. And then you end up with different pathways and processes for different things. And I think this is fantastic as far as unifying our non-traditional students and just approaching them as one group. If your school doesn't offer the sport, or you're a home education or PEP student, this is what you're considered. And when you're considered an eligible student, these are what your options are. So I think that part of Senate Bill 538 is fantastic.
Yeah, I agree.
We're going to unify it.
Yeah, I think uniformity is great. And I think it allows, everybody to be treated like in one kind of uniform way without having special rules for everybody that you all have to keep track of. So roll right into participation options.
Sure. So the participation options, Any eligible student, so like we said, a student whose school doesn't offer the sports, or a home education or PEP student, has the ability to participate in sports in the county in which they live in. You can choose public, charter, lab, private, as long as it's in the county you live in. The next option is if no public school, charter, lab, private school in the county in which you live offers the sport, then you can start tapping into an adjacent county. So the adjacent county, we've worked on an adjacency list for non-traditional students, so families have a quick reference for what is considered an adjacent county. It's essentially any county that touches borders or corners. So if you don't have that opportunity in the county in which you live in, this bill says that you can now step into that adjacent county.
I don't think about sometimes that they're oddly shaped. Right?
They are very oddly shaped.
I forget that they're not all like, squares and easy to four sides. So that's interesting, the words you chose.
And sometimes you have to like really zoom in on the map and see, okay, there's actually 5 counties touching right here in this little dot.
Yeah.
So when we were looking at that, we erred on the side of, yes, it's touching, whenever we couldn't really find the fine detail of that. But we do have that resource to help families figure out what counties are considered adjacent. And then if there are no options in the county in which you live or one of those adjacent counties, this bill allows you to appeal to the executive director. So we've approached this as having the school that you want to participate for, a school you've identified that does offer the sports, to submit an EL-10, which is a request for eligibility ruling, to our office. And we're able to look into those details and just verify that there were no opportunities in your county and adjacent county, and this is a necessary placement for athletics. So you'll see in those visuals that I included the actual bylaw language, and it just outlines what we talked about. The home education and PEP students is separated out just because they also have the ability to participate for a home education cooperative. And the option with the home education cooperative, we spent some time kind of clarifying this because we had some concerns with our home education cooperatives that take on membership from multiple counties on how they needed to approach that now. And essentially, a home education cooperative can join the association as a member school. So the way we're approaching those is if the student is a member of their cooperative, regardless of what county they live in, they can participate for that cooperative. Just like if a student were traditionally enrolled in a school, it doesn't matter what county they're coming from, as long as they're a student of that school, they can play for that school. So that's how we've approached the home education cooperative, and that's why home education and PEP are separated out into their own bylaw. The remaining non-traditional types are in 9222, and it has the same participation options with the exception of that home education cooperative piece being removed.
Got you.
And we did touch on, I'm sorry, did you want to touch on something there? Okay.
No, go ahead. You're good.
So we did touch on the activity fees with Representative Abbott. So that's just outlined there on the screen for you. It essentially is explicitly stating in law now that you can charge an activity fee. As Representative Abbott mentioned, some counties were already doing that around the state. There was already an activity fee. I can actually remember, I've been out of school for over 20 years, but when I was in school, there was an activity fee for particular sports, and it ranged depending on what that sport did as far as camps and spirit gear and whatever else was involved. So we know that activity fees have been a thing, but this now explicitly states that you can do it for both enrolled students and non-enrolled students. And we touched on that a little bit, the fee that the enrolled students pay for an amount that is relevant to the activity not to exceed 400. And it's the greater of those based on the language in the statute. The interesting thing is when we get a little bit further down, it pulls out home education students and public school students and says that those students can't be charged any more than what the enrolled students are charged. So I think that kind of protects the families a little bit as far as the amount of money that's going to have to come out of pocket for them to participate in these activities. So we've seen some varying policies come out, and we know that a lot of counties are still trying to develop those. So as Representative Abbott said, we'll kind of see where those land and if that needs a little bit of tweaking in the future.
Right. Yeah, well, I think one of the things that we were pushing for in the drafting of this part of the language was that, not every homeschool student start to get lumped together as homeschool students, and everybody starts talking about them, but are they the scholarship PEP students? When we look at things from a legislative perspective or a law, what words are used in law, we don't call them homeschoolers, we call them home education or PEP. So we're clear about whether or not they're getting funding, but it's colloquial and it's common to just call them all homeschoolers. And so then it's like, well, are they getting a scholarship or not getting a scholarship? And, I didn't want them all to be lumped together and being charged and assessed fees that they intended to go to scholarship students because the money flows down, to the scholarship funding organization and not to the county for the student. And so keeping them kind of separate was one of our big things that we were trying to push for to make sure there was clarity. We oftentimes try to help our families by getting them to use the right words and how important it is to make sure you call yourself the right kind of student here, make sure that they know what that means. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that in there.
And we oftentimes get phone calls that have the same kind of pathway in the conversation. We'll get told that their student is homeschooled. And the first thing we ask is, are you enrolled in a correspondence online private school? Are you in an online charter school? Are you getting the PEP scholarship? Are you PEP hybrid in your home half the time? So we also have to ask those follow-up questions to make sure that we're actually talking to a home education parent, and not just the parent of somebody who does their education at home. So yes, we run into that a lot. We figured that out pretty quickly when we started answering questions, and then they were calling back and saying, the athletic director says that doesn't apply to me. And we realized we had to ask a few more questions to figure out what type of education model they were actually following.
Oh, you're a private school student. Oh, okay, great.
You have a totally different set of participation options.
Yeah, right.
So, and see, that's where the unification of the non-traditional students is going to assist us too, because it really doesn't matter who you are now, with the exception of the home education cooperative piece. So, so the next big thing in Senate Bill 538 is the transfer piece. So we through this past school year, it was sports specific. And as Representative Abbott said, we did have students who were playing at 3, even sometimes 4 schools a year, because as long as they showed up prior to the sport beginning, they were able to participate in that sport. And if they transferred during the season after they had started participating,
immediately eligible,
they got to meet that good cause policy that he was referencing that's different for every county in the state. So reining that in a little bit and saying that students cannot participate at 2 different schools in the same school year unless they meet specific criteria. And the statute will maintain 3 of those that were in there previously: the dependent children of active duty military personnel, students in foster care, students who have gone through a court order change in custody. And previously that last one was the good cause that was developed by the school district. That has gone away, and the FHSAA Board of Directors has approved 3 additional transfer regulations that can be used in these situations. So we know that there are going to be students with real life situations that are out of their control and need to have some sort of exemption in place so that they can continue to have access to athletics. So they introduced that full and complete move, the district reassignment, and the transfer within the first 20 school days. And then in addition, now that this is back in FHSAA bylaws and not completely statutory, it can be appealed. So if the child doesn't meet one of the 6 regulations listed, they can still go through sectional appeals to say, hey, I have an even more unique situation
Mm.
that deserves a second look so that this child can still have access to athletics.
Yeah, that's good. We've had some very interesting. I don't know if interesting is the I don't know if I mean it that way. They're very interesting, but challenging exceptions that have kind of been brought to some of our attention sometimes, where there's a child with a disability and they've developed a relationship with a specific coach, and that coach moved, and it's like there are just some uniquely volatile moments that can be life changing. Is it time to deal with learning how to deal with disappointment in this very challenging thing, or is this something that we can keep something flowing? Yeah, and that's not a tightrope that I want to be the one making those decisions for. I'm glad that burden is not on me. But we've had some very heart-wrenching and challenging situations brought to our attention. So, and I know that this gives you room to kind of deal with some of those, and I think that's
Absolutely.
great.
Yes, absolutely. So another thing that the Senate bill has touched on is sport manuals.
Mm-hmm.
The FHSAA does have individual sport manuals that we've been maintaining. It does touch on the specific sport rules, in-game operation, championship advancement. So this is just explicitly stating now that we must maintain those. And then what it introduced was, if there is a real-time scoring requirement and a student doesn't have access to the equipment necessary, they can ask for accommodations as long as they ask for those 72 hours in advance. So what comes to mind for me is golf. We use iWannaMaker, and it requires a student to have a smartphone with the app on it in order to do that real-time scoring. So we've had a couple families reach out and say, we don't have the funds for an additional cell phone to be given to our child for this activity. And it was kind of looked at as an additional piece of equipment, but not something that was necessary for the game itself. So I think this is great to be able to introduce the ability to ask for those accommodations, as long as it's within a reasonable amount of time for us to figure out how we need to approach it.
That's valid.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, we have Rep Abbott on. Maybe cough, cough, hint, hint. We could get him to put digital devices in the scholarship program, and we could solve that a little easier. Wink, wink. No, I'm kidding. Another time. Anyway, we'll keep rolling.
Another thing that was addressed in this bill were the due process appeals. We were having appeals once a month for eligibility. We did have some students, either because of paperwork or timing, that were sitting out of their sport for an extended period of time. So this is making sure that the students are heard in a timely manner. It's giving a deadline not to exceed 20 days. So we have taken the step to increase our sectional appeals from once a month to twice a month.
Okay.
We'll still be offering them through the months of August through April. And the first meeting of each month is going to be an option to be in person or teleconference. And then the second meeting of each month is going to be teleconference only.
So this is where I sit sometimes and listen in on these sectional appeals, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
yeah.
That's what these are. Right.
As part of the PLAC, yes.
That's right, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great.
So
cool.
yes,
More work.
That's exactly what these meetings are. Yep. So we'll
that's great.
We'll have fun just getting our committees to adapt to meeting twice a month. That's why we introduced that the second meeting would be teleconference, to make sure that we could still have the attendance that was required to run those meetings. And we've actually had a lot of our member ADs step up and offer to be alternates for us in the coming year. So
cool.
That's been awesome. It's been awesome that people are willing to say, hey, I know that schedules get busy, and this is going to be taxing on a few people. So if you need the assistance, we're here.
Awesome.
And then, this is not directly out of statute, but just a reminder for our families that are listening in. For those home education students, the forms that are necessary, the EL1 is new. That's the ECG screening. So I wanted to touch on that one just a little bit.
Sure.
Any student who is entering their 9th year of education or declaring as a 9th grader on their athletic paperwork is going to need this ECG screening. And if they're declaring in the 10th, 11th, or 12th grade for next year and have not participated for an FHSAA member school previously, they will also need to get that ECG screening. The thing that we've been hearing that I wanted to make sure I touched on is getting the ECG itself is not difficult, but the results can take 2 to 6 weeks to get back. So if you're waiting until just before the season starts, you may not be able to jump right in if you're waiting on those results to come in.
Because you need the results to be turned in, not just proof that you submitted for it and you're waiting on the results, but you need the actual results to be submitted.
Yes, sir. Okay. Yes, sir, we do. And then, as always, the physical and consent forms, the EL2 and EL3, we're still maintaining that home education packet, the EL7 and EL7V forms, and then the GA4 affidavit of recruiting. And then I wanted to include the contact information for the individuals who work in the eligibility and compliance department here. So you have myself, Ashton Mosley, Malcolm Pollock, and Stephanie Schaefer are all administrators of eligibility and compliance. We separate alphabetically by member school. So Stephanie is A through F currently. Ashton is G through O, and Malcolm is P through Z. So if there is a participating school that one of our home education families wants to participate for and they have questions, anyone in the department can answer, but those individuals that are assigned to that school are going to be more well versed in that area. And we'll be adding an additional staff member this summer, which is really exciting. So we may see that split separate a little bit differently for the coming year.
All right, cool. Well, thank you for that. And thank you for the contact information. This is a really interesting and brief rundown. Do you want to dive into some of the questions or hot FAQs? I know you guys have been getting hit a lot. We've been getting hit a lot with especially the county question. Can I play across county? And we kind of answered that as we rolled through, but maybe we should peel it back a little bit and talk about it. I appreciate Rep. Abbott giving the background that he gave while he was here. When we put out a notice, because we saw the language change for this bill earlier on, we didn't get a lot of feedback at that moment for, oh no, this would negatively impact us. But once the bill was finalized and the text was enrolled and sent to the governor, we got blown up with calls left, right, and center about, oh my goodness, now my kid is not going to be able to play, and we participate across county lines. And so talk a little bit about the grandfathering provision that you guys put in for implementation, and explain that a little bit.
Sure. So as Representative Abbott mentioned, there were immediate concerns after the bill was engrossed, enrolled, signed, all that fun stuff about students who were essentially established across county lines. And we recognize that interrupting a student's education is difficult, interrupting a student's spring group is difficult, interrupting a student's athletic participation is difficult, especially when previously it was permitted. So essentially the grandfathering in is, we recognize that you were established with this program and that you thought you were going to be able to do that through graduation. So if you had already established yourself with that program across county lines, the grandfather clause allows you to remain there as long as you don't change your affiliation in the meantime through graduation.
And that applies from 9th through 12th, right? I had some families who have come to me and they're like, well, their sibling is at that school and they're at that school, but they're in the middle school grade, so they're not participating in 9th through 12th, but they're participating in other like a la carte courses or something like that. they wouldn't be grandfathered in. They have to be participating in the sports programs already at 9 through 12, correct?
So they have to be participating in the sports programs. I wouldn't say participating at the high school level necessarily. It was
Okay.
the way that I'm reading and applying it is that if you were a registered non-traditional student participating in sports through the rules from the previous year, outside of the county, and you want to continue to do that, I think where it would kind of land on what you're talking about is if the student were at a grade or a school that terminated in grade 8,
Mm.
and then choosing a school for ninth grade, you'd have to go back into your county. I think
Okay.
where it would apply is if a student had been participating for a combination school, um, as let's say an eighth grader last year and had already
Right.
established themselves. I would say that that would get to carry over and be
Okay.
grandfathered in.
That's a good clarification. I appreciate that because that is some of the kind of questions we're getting where some of the private schools house more than just 9 through 12.
Absolutely.
And their sibling might be 9 through 12, but this other student that they have is not. And they're like, well, how do I tell one kid they play it? How do I tell the other, see a nerd? Like,
Well,
good
and
luck to you.
we've gotten that question as well with the
Yeah.
sibling piece.
Yeah.
But the question we've gotten is the sibling hasn't participated yet. And
Mm.
that one's a little bit different because
Mm-hmm.
the grandfather clause does require that they were a registered non-traditional actively participating in the previous year.
Okay.
So if they hadn't gone out for anything yet, you
Mm.
could have siblings that get split up.
Got you. Okay. Good clarification there as well.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What else do we have? I've got other questions, but where do you want to go?
Well, if you have other questions, let's go ahead and dive into those. We've had a few frequently asked questions that I can touch on as well, but if you've got some you got ready, let's do it.
I mean, most of them center on the playing across county lines. I think a lot of the other stuff is pretty straightforward. One question I do think we have is the start of the statute says that a student that's enrolled in the school can participate at sports at that school. And then there is a section of statute 1002.421 that recognizes hybrid enrollment with private schools and PEP home education students. So they're enrolled in both. They're enrolled in the private school for purposes of taking classes, but they're registered as home education or PEP for the purposes of satisfying attendance with the state. Would a student like that be able to enroll in a school across a county line as a hybrid? So they're actually enrolled in both, and would that satisfy the school that they're enrolled in? They can participate in sports.
Yeah, so PEP is newer,
Mm-hmm.
and they're kind of adapting that as they go through, and they've
Mm-hmm.
introduced that approved hybrid private
Yep,
school piece
that's
of
what
the
I'm talking
PEP
about.
scholarship. And we actually sought clarification from the Department of Education on that one because we had a couple of questions on, well, this student is PEP hybrid, which means they're our student. We're
Right.
keeping records for them. They're going to get a diploma from us when they finish.
Mm-hmm.
So for them to be on our campus 2 days a week, but they don't technically belong to us for athletics seems a little crazy.
Uh-huh.
So we did seek clarification on that, and we were told that the student who's enrolled in a PEP private school, approved private school, is a private school student. So
Okay.
those students are able to play for the hybrid school they're enrolled in. And then if the hybrid school doesn't offer the sport, then they would participate back in their home county for anything not offered.
Okay, understood. That's good clarification. Yeah, I think that's really important because I don't know if you're aware, but some of the recent information that I had gotten from Step Up for Students, because sometimes they'll share some of their numbers with us and things like that. Among the top 5 purchases in the category as a whole are private school tuition. So you have a lot of students out there who are, I know we call them homeschoolers when they're on PEP, but a lot of the students out there utilizing PEP are actually utilizing it for private schools. So I figured we were going to run into this a lot, maybe.
Well, and I kind of view this a few years, it's been more than a few years, but a while back, we also had the split from Florida Virtual Full-Time to Florida Virtual Flex.
Right.
And we also had to approach those students separately because if you were Florida Virtual Full-Time, you were full-time enrolled and you were diploma seeking. If you were Flex, you're essentially creating your own curriculum and you could be registered with the district as home education. So
Mm-hmm.
we had to separate those two types of FLVS students out. And similarly, we're doing that with PEP students now. You have the PEP scholarship student who is able to kind of piecemeal their education and receive things from multiple different institutions and
Right.
not be full-time enrolled. And then you have the PEP hybrid student who is full-time enrolled and diploma seeking. So I see it the same way in my brain as separating out
Got
to
you.
categorize them differently. So that PEP hybrid is now going to be considered private school and participate through that avenue.
Got you. Okay. Yeah, that clarifies. It clarifies quite a bit. That's good. I think, let's see, one more is, I want to dial in a little bit on the play multiple sports transfers, because I think that piece was very interesting. The immediate eligibility, I noticed it wasn't in the slide, but in the bill, one of the things I noticed as the bill was being drafted was that everywhere immediate eligibility was found, it was immediately stricken. And so it's important to note, I think, for families that might be listening, that it's not implied that you're immediately eligible to participate in the sport. You're seeking to participate in the sport, and that is now not necessarily a given, especially when it comes to matters of transfers. And so, do you want to elaborate on that at all, or?
Yeah. So through this year, immediately eligible was applied to the ability to seek membership on a team.
Mm-hmm.
So you were immediately eligible to try out, you were immediately eligible to work out condition. It still didn't necessarily mean immediately eligible to participate in a contest for that school.
Right.
And I think there was some confusion around that. So
Mm.
coming into this next year with this new language and then also adding the piece of the transfer, I think it was important to see that stricken so that we didn't have that same confusion.
Yep.
Where it gets interesting is you have the non-traditional piece that allows students to play for multiple schools in one school year. And then you have the transfer piece that says you can't, and
Mm-hmm.
trying to separate those out and help people understand where one applies and where the other applies. So, and I think honestly, home education and PEP students are going to be the hardest one whenever we're approaching those two separate rules, because if I have a charter school student who's attending a school and that school doesn't offer water polo, they can go play that sport somewhere else under the non-traditional rule and not be considered a transfer. But if
Mm-hmm.
they physically withdraw from the charter school and enroll in a new school, then they're considered a transfer for that sport. Your home education and PEP students are not doing that. They're not withdrawing and enrolling. So
Right.
we're looking at where they first establish themselves each school year. And if that school has the additional sports they want to play, that's where they're going to have to play throughout that school year. What's going to be interesting is whenever the school they've chosen first doesn't offer a sport that they want to participate
Yeah.
in, and trying to figure out how to apply it from there. So
Right.
we don't want to limit that. A home
Right.
education student who chooses a school that doesn't offer a particular sport should be able to go play that sport elsewhere.
Right.
So we're just trying to figure out how to map that out in language and in flow charts and frequently asked questions.
Yeah.
To help our ADs understand that that's not going to be considered a transfer when that comes
Mhm.
up. And it's kind of, you were talking earlier about everything's
Yeah.
all wired together and you're trying to figure out where things belong. So I think that'll be a challenge for us as far as educating. But I do think that it's important for our home education families to know that once you choose a school, that's where we're going to consider you to be participating for the year unless that school doesn't offer the sports. And then we can
Right.
look at the options available outside of that.
And that's what the statutes say. So that's
Yeah.
I hope that by now parents have read it and are aware of those, but I think it's important to cover them from where we both sit as well, because I think that having the conversation allows them to go, oh, I didn't even think about that part of it or this part of it, and kind of get that comprehensive view of it as a whole. We're running out of time, and your time is valuable to me, so I want to make sure that I am, conscious of it. We usually run until about 1. So let's hear some of the FAQs that you guys have had, things that you might want parents to know about the process or practically that have changed, or, some of the popular stuff that parents are coming in to you with.
Okay. So one of the big ones we're getting, and it's very similar to what we were just talking about with the PEP hybrid. Parents have asked if we take our home education student and enroll them in one class across the county line, does that then give them access to that school for athletics? And the answer to that is no. So at the end of the day, you're still considered a home education student, and you're choosing how to educate your child, but that doesn't give you access to athletics in another county automatically. So if you're still registered as home education with your district, you're going to have to participate under the participation options outlined in statute. So you start in county, even if you're taking a course across county lines. So that's a big one that's come in. I think people are trying to figure out how to navigate this, and programs they've had their eye on, and their kid is just now getting to high school and they can't access it now. So I think they're trying to navigate how to get through those.
That makes sense. So taking a class at a private school doesn't technically count as enrolling from where the FHSAA sits, and like how you interpret that. You wouldn't look at that and think, oh, that student is enrolled.
Right, because at the end of the day, you're still enrolled in the home education program, so you're still considered that type of non-traditional student.
Understood. Okay, yeah, I can see that position. What else?
Another question that's been asked is, if no public or charter school in the county offers the sport, but a private school does, and we don't want to participate for the private school, do we have to?
Right, so that's a stack. Let me rephrase that. So if no public or charter school offers the sport, then normally if it's not offered, I would be able to go to another county. But the private school does offer it, but then I don't have an agreement with them. So am I free to go outside the county or not outside the county?
Right. So that's the key. The agreement is key. So the agreement is on both the school and the family. So if you don't come to an agreement to participate for a private school, then yes, you can go out of county. You're not required to participate at the private school if that's the only option within the county.
Yeah, I did have a parent ask me, well, does that mean I have to go around to every single private school in the county and interview them and see if, and I was like, no, that's not what that means.
Well, but in the reverse, if a public school offers it, then you would have to participate for the public school.
Right. Good clarification.
Yeah. Another big one we've gotten is if I'm required to have 2 home addresses and one parent lives in one county and another parent in a different county, how do I approach that as far as athletics? So we've established this in previous years through what we call establishing residency each year, and that's where you participate first. So if a student chooses an athletic program in County A, then they're going to be required to stay at that school for the remainder of the school year. So the answer to that is you can't pick and choose which address to use depending on the sports season. So once you choose one, that's where you are for the rest of the year.
Good clarification. I man, you said something that made me think of something that another parent asked. There was one of the parents asked their school that they participate in. I think they were a homeschool parent homeschooling through a private school, but the private school was located in the adjacent county, and their home address is in their county. So County A is their home address, and County B is the private school's address in that county. Their county for participation would be considered County A, their home address.
Yeah.
They would still be able to participate in if that private school offered sports, because that's the school they're registered with in the other county. So if that particular private school offered sports, then they could participate at sports at that private school that they're homeschooling through. But outside of that, County A would be their county of choice. Did I say that correctly?
You did, yep.
Right,
and using those terms, homeschool versus home education.
Yep.
So we're talking about somebody who is enrolled at the private school doing their work at home.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. It gets very. I think parents sometimes get frustrated with me when I field some of those calls, because I have to slow the conversation down and they want to get to what their issue is, and I'm like, okay, but I need to understand. I need to understand the issue first, and then tell me all about. It's I hope I don't frustrate them too much, but to have to check all the boxes before we can move into what the problem is can be a little daunting to them when they're just ready to
We have the same challenge.
Yeah, lay on you how much they hate it. And you're like, oh, I hear you.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right. We've got time for maybe one more.
I think that's the majority of what we've received so far. There's probably going to be more once our sports season starts.
Yeah.
So I think this will be an ever evolving document that we have available.
Yeah.
But those are the main ones coming in right now.
All right. Well, very good. Hey, listen, thank you for being with us today. And I really appreciate the time that you took and putting together the bylaws and pulling out the segments to talk about specifically and comb through some of the frequent issues that we've all been kind of running into and, bumping our toes on. So thank you for that. And is there anything that you would like to kind of say to parents or students that are out there as we wrap up?
Well, first I want to say thank you for having me. It was great to be on today to speak with you and also Representative Abbott for a little bit. For our families, I just want to make sure they know that we're here. We're here to assist. We want to make sure that they understand how to navigate things. And I know you're a great resource, but if they want to ask questions of the FHSAA, please use those direct phone lines that were on that contact page and just let us know what you're running into. And we want to make sure that we're also keeping track of any issues so that we can speak to people like Representative Abbott whenever it comes time to maybe tweak these a little bit and get it right for our families. So we're here. We're a resource.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you for that. I'm going to go ahead and leave it at that and roll us on out of here. As we do that, I want to say thank you to our top sponsors, Arete FPEA, Fisher Precious Metals, and TBHC Group. And thank you again to parents in the free state of Florida, those of you who, you know what, you make the personal sacrifice, you put your kids above everything else, and you pour into their lives daily and mentoring and advocating and educating and building those bonds. Maybe, just maybe, when they're in their mid-20s and they're going through it and life is hitting them hard, instead of calling their second grade teacher, Mrs. Beasley, they'll call you. No, they probably will call you anyway. So it's good on you that you have those bonds, and we're here for you in the Capitol, being Parents' Voice in the Capitol. Without further ado, we'll give you your Monday back. Go out there and make those wonderful memories.